we're going to solve this equation. It says equals 0, and we know that 1 is already a 0. So we're going to find the rest of the zeros. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do synthetic division with the 0 given. So I'm going to have the 1, and then I have 1, negative 13, 47, and negative 35. Bring down the 1, and then I multiply. 1 times 1 is 1, and then that gives me a negative 12 when I add. 1 times negative 12 is negative 12, and I get 35 when I add, and 1 times 35 is 35, and I get a remainder of 0. Now, this right here represents x squared minus 12x plus 35. And so now I need to solve that. That is a quadratic, and I can solve it by factoring or quadratic formula, or even, in this case, completing the square. So I'm going to attempt to factor it. I think this factors. Multiply to give me 35, and add to give me 12 would be 7 and 5. And so I get x is equal to 7 and x is equal to 5. I already know that one answer was 1. They told me that one. So those are my 3 answers. Those are the 3 zeros for this particular problem. Okay, so here we're going to do the same thing we did before. We have 1 0, which is given, which is 1/2. And then we have 2, negative 5, 12, and negative 5. And we're going to use synthetic division. And we're going to try to find the other zeros. Okay, so find the remaining zeros when 1 is given. One answer is 1/2, and then we're going to try to find the others. So we're going to use synthetic division with the 1/2. And remember, taking half of something is like dividing by 2. So half of 2 is 1. And then I'm going to add that and get negative 4. Half of negative 4 is negative 2. And then I add that, I get 10. And then half of 10 is 5, and I get 0. So now this resulting quadratic is 2x squared minus 4x plus 10 equals 0. And so now I have to solve this. First thing I notice is that there's a 2 as a common factor. And so this is what I get. And as I look at the quadratic itself, that's not factorable. So I'm going to have to use the quadratic formula or the completing the square method. Now, for this particular problem, the completing the square method is going to be the easiest way to solve this. You may use the quadratic formula. But we haven't done one using completing the square in a long time, so I'm going to go ahead and do completing the square and let you get a refresher on how to do that. The first thing you do for completing the square is you move the c over. So I've got the 5 moved over to the other side of the equal sign. And then you add that magic number. The magic number is your b is half of b squared. Half of b squared. Well, half of negative 2 is negative 1. And negative 1 squared is 1. So I'm basically just going to add 1 to both sides. And what that does is it produces a trinomial that will factor. This one is x minus 1 squared, and then I have negative 4. And then I can take the square root of both sides, and I get x minus 1 is equal to positive and negative 2i. And then I'm going to add 1 to both sides. So I get 1 plus or minus 2i. So my answers, my zeros, are 1/2, which is the one that they gave me, and then 1 plus 2i, and 1 minus 2i.